Thanks, Mary, for taking the time to talk with me today. A few questions about your background and how you got interested in women's history, your connections with the college, and that kind of thing. So, thank you again for taking the time. I wonder, can you tell me about your own education? I mean, what did you study? Where did you study? Can you tell me anything about that?
Well, I spent most of my secondary education in Cork City. We were living there. My father was a civil servant, and I was at St. Angela's College, an Ursuline school. And um, it was funny at that stage. Uh, I just felt I'd love to go to university. My brother had gone the year before, and my parents, who were very, very good in every way, they weren't thinking of women, girls going to university. So I plucked up my courage and said I'd love to go. I just wanted to go because I felt it would be a wonderful place of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said yes. And I went, and it was only when I went, we moved to Dublin then, before I did that, when I went to UCD, that I got interested in history. I hadn't been interested in it at school, but when I went to the lectures there, I began to get very, very interested.
Mm.
And when you say women's history, that came um, during the 1960s. Feminist books began to appear, particularly from America. Books like Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique, Germaine Greer, The Female Eunuch. And I was reading these, and I more and more became a feminist.
Mm-hmm.
So that was how I got interested.
Mm.
And I suppose it was from that then I got kind of interested in women in history.
But did you ever study it yourself in college, or did you have a familiar experience of it
No,
not
they
being
weren't
available?
teaching women's history. They weren't talking about it then, but uh, many of us are beginning to become feminists during that
Mm-hmm.
period. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. So it was in college that you were kind of
got interested in
enlightened
history.
in this.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And in terms of Maynooth, I know that you've lived here a long time. Can you tell me how long you've lived here? You can put it in decades, if not in exact years, if
Oh,
you'd
I
like.
know exactly the year. The year we came here was 1964, and I had young children, and we were living on the main street out there. And it so happened that my husband knew one of the professors in the college, uh, Donald Flanagan. He was in dogmatic theology, and we used to invite him up to the house sometimes, and very, very nice. And he brought up a friend of his, Kevin McNamara, in moral theology, later Archbishop of Dublin, and he was somebody we got quite friendly with. And during the 60s, the late 60s, the college was going to open up. Everybody knew that, and we were wondering what would happen.
Mm.
And so I was wondering, and in fact, my husband actually said to me, you should go in there and teach because I was already had a degree in history. And so one evening when Kevin McNamara was in having a cup of coffee with us, and when he got up to go out, I just said to him, I suppose I'll be coming in to teach someday soon. And he turned around and came back and he said, would you be interested? And I said, yes. And he said that Tom Fee, Tommaso Fee, that great Irish scholar,
Mm-hmm.
at that stage he was still using the English version of his name.
Oh.
He said Tom Fee was looking for somebody. So the next thing was that Kevin brought Tom or Tomas up to the house to introduce us. And Tom sat down with me on the couch and began talking straight away about which of us would teach what. And he asked me, I always remember, he said, would I like to do the Renaissance or the Reformation? And so I said, the Renaissance. And he did tell me afterwards he was sorry he gave me the choice. But anyway, that was how I started. It was on a part-time thing like that. And I went in feeling nervous in some ways, but already having met some of the professors and knowing that they were fine. And it was grand because I was the only woman on the teaching staff. There are plenty of women working in the college, and that was very nice. I used to meet people I knew. But uh, The professors were all very, very friendly, at least if any of them weren't, they didn't show it. I used to go in and have coffee with them in their room, and I got to know quite a lot of them. And Thomas was a great person to work with. He was a very, very nice chap, and he was very, very good with students. I think he knew every student doing history by name, and he was amazing. And the students were fine too. They were ready. Anything you wanted done, they were able to do it. I remember when I was doing the Renaissance, I got some slides of art and I brought them along. And I just said, would somebody be able to organise a projector? And somebody said, yes, no embarrassment of any kind. And the chap brought one along and he sat up with me on one of the benches. I went in beside him. He showed all the slides and I was able to talk about them. You know, they were great. And just another anecdote, they taught me a very, very useful lesson. The very first lecture I went into there, it was second and third years together. And I don't remember what it was about, but I do remember how anxious I was about it. I was sure the students would know at least as much as I did about the history. So I got together every interpretation and view I could think of it. And I went in, didn't say anything about what had actually happened, but all about interpretations. And they listened, and I thought that was great. And then the next day, Thomas came to me and he said they had said they didn't understand a word that I had said. And I thought that was the end of my career. And he started to laugh and talk about the next week. And they really taught me such a lesson that interpretation was important, but you needed everybody to know what you were talking about, interpreting first.
The basics.
So it was, I enjoyed those years, I must say, very much, yeah.
And were you always teaching big classes or did you teach small classes as well? What kind of experience did you have?
In the beginning, the way they did it was the first years were in one group and then second and third years who opted for history, a smaller group. But as the number of students grew, that kind of, gradually changed. But you see, I was there on a kind of a part-time basis, the first woman on the academic staff. The second year I was there, another woman came, Angela Lucas, in the English department. And then in 1971, the college opened up more. And through the Higher Education Authority, they advertised posts. And the posts that Angela and I had were advertised too. And we had to apply for them because we had been taken on in a more, I suppose, informal way. But luckily we came through. We had to get references and all the rest of it and be interviewed. And a number of other people came in, including, I remember, Paddy Duffy setting up a new department of geography. And at that stage, I think there were about 12 people, lay people appointed then. And they gave us a room where we could have coffee together. And that was lovely because we got to know, what was going on in all the departments. And
that sounds very nice.
It was very,
smaller,
very nice.
A smaller group. I'm just wondering, because you mentioned the year there was never any issue about you being a married woman working in the college. Do you know the way that would have existed?
Well, as a feminist, we were all working, that married women in the civil service didn't have to retire. We didn't actually get that changed until 1973. And I always thought it was quite intriguing. Not that the rules would have applied to the college, but that they had no problem with it. And I actually thought that from the college's point of view, having a woman coming in to teach the students might have seemed quite a safe thing that she was a married woman.
That's true, yeah.
I don't know, but it never was an issue. Yeah,
I guess they had their own outside way of operating outside of the public sector because they weren't publicly funded at that time in that way. That's a really interesting kind of loophole that you found. I like that.
I just sort of, and they were very, it was well known to them all that I was a feminist. I was actually on that Late Late Show in 1971.
Yes.
And Professor Jerry McGarry, who'd set up the Furrow some years before that, he asked me to write an article about women in the church, and he published it in the Furrow in 1971. You know, they were great, really, to work with and to get to know.
So you just found it a very open atmosphere, and
Yes.
That's really good.
It was.
You mentioned the Late Late Show. That I can't help you to ask a bit more about that. Would you tell us what you remember of that day and that time?
It was just pretty enjoyable. I mean, the feminist movement was about women's liberation, and I was invited by some of the women to join it. I had met up with a few of them, and Gay Byrne asked us questions. I can't really remember very much what we said, but it went well, I think.
I've never seen the whole thing because they don't have that up on the RT archive site. I've only seen clips of it, but it seems like a fun time, a fun night.
Yeah, I remember we all enjoyed it kind of very much,
Yeah. I'm not sure you'd find that now, a whole show dedicated to feminism.
Well, you see, it was a new thing then, and beginning to make a mark.
Yeah, that's true. Teaching women in history wasn't common in universities until probably the last 10 or 15 years.
Not in the universities as such, but among some of us working in them.
Exactly.
I mean, I got to know, for instance, Margaret McCurtain in UCD very early on, and others too. And we were talked about these issues. And of course, she published her book, which she edited along with Donegal Corroin, you know, Women in Irish Society, the Historical Experience. That was in 1978. And again, I mean, we had been publishing some articles before that, but that was very, very interesting and made a terrific impression, ranging over Irish history over the centuries, and women as well as men, established historians writing in it. And then there was setting up the forerunner of the Women's History Association.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. So you met in Dublin, I think.
That was very interesting because the International Federation for Research in Women's History was established around 1987 or so, I think. And I can't remember how I had come into contact with it, but I had with Ida Blom, who was the first in Norway, who was the first president of it. And they were organising a conference of kind of delegates from as many countries as possible who'd be interested in women's history. And so we got together, Margaret McCurtain and myself and some others, a committee in Ireland, and we called it the Irish Committee for Research in Women's History, like the Federation. And they had this conference for women delegates from as many countries as possible in the Rockefeller Foundation in Bellagio, near Lake Como in Italy, in that was 89. And I was kind of our delegate to that. I think I put a photograph of it into the archive. I think you probably have it there, of the people at it, you know, the group. I think there were about 24 people at it. And that was very, very interesting, and meeting people from other countries,
Yeah. And did you sort of meet once a month or regularly? I mean, did people present papers?
In Ireland?
Yeah. What was the...
We did meet, and we had minutes. And I wish I could remember. I think the minutes have been put into the archive, which would probably tell you how often we had meetings. We did have them, but I can't really remember how regularly.
I'm still trying to gather the archive as such, and some things have survived and some things haven't. And I think probably they're still in people's attics or, you know, in their boxes and piles. So it will be continuing to add to it, I think.
I remember, looking for stuff I had and giving it to for the archive. So I hope it's
yes.
There somewhere.
No, I have that stuff, and that's there. Yes,
good.
And from some other people. Do you remember when you decided to change the name to the Women's History Association of Ireland?
No, I think that was after I was very actively involved in it.
Mm.
But it was probably quite a sensible change.
Yeah. And you were the first president.
I was,
Yeah. Just out of interest, had you come across colleagues at conferences or things like that were history conferences, people like Mary O'Dowd or Margaret McCurtain, or did you just know them from your all independent kind of love of history and feminism and wanting to get together?
I think we probably met up in both ways. Funnily enough, Margaret is the one I knew for longest, and I got to know her very soon after I started teaching. Where exactly, how we met up, I'm still not quite sure.
Yeah.
But she was a great person to work with.
Yeah.
She was, full of ideas and a great mentor of people. But she never tried to dominate. She was open to everybody else working with her too. She was great.
That's one of the strengths of the Women's History Association of Ireland. It is very inclusive, and the both of you did a lot to set that tone. So it's wonderful. It's really, really good. In terms of your own work, and I have my copy of your lovely collection of essays, even though you've published beyond that as well. What's the topic you've been most drawn to research, or that kind of stays with you?
I find that hard to say because one writes about whatever's one interested at the times. I think it might be about the ideas and thinking that was going on. I really have to look at it all myself again.
There's an essay in here on Republican motherhood, for example, and you're going back to Mary Wollstonecraft and that's foundational.
I must say
ideas.
I found that very interesting. It struck me that there was so much interaction between these ideas. Yeah.
I can confirm to you that I once met scholars from Canada and they revered you because of this work. They just had you on a pedestal. They thought your work was absolutely fantastic. They were excited about it. So
oh my goodness.
I can confirm you're internationally recognized. In terms of just your time at the college, how long did you spend actually teaching at the college?
In Maynooth? Well, I started in 1968 and I retired in 1994. And I didn't like retiring at all, but I was very, very lucky in that I had been for some years an occasional lecturer at Trinity in the Centre for Gender and Women's Studies. And being an occasional lecturer, you didn't have to retire at 65. And I was able to continue that for quite some time.
Yes. Did you start that immediately?
No, I was doing it for a few years before that. You see,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was really worked out very well for me.
Well, and for me, because I got to meet you there.
I remember that indeed, Jennifer.
Yeah, it was really, really good. So that's a long span of time between 68 and 94. Can you reflect on any changes you saw in the college at that time, or your teaching, or how you experienced the time there?
Well, that's hard to say. I'm sure there must have been so many. I know in the history department, I did eventually manage to bring in some women's history. Yeah. In kind of optional lectures that people could, which were, very enjoyable.
Yeah. Were they popular? Were they popular? Do you think students were drawn to the topics?
The students. Well, even when I went in there first, the students seemed kind of happy. Yeah. It was interesting, of course, as time went on, more and more lay students and the clerical students became fewer. Yeah.
That's a big change you would have seen throughout your time.
Yes,
now
it's
very rare
change,
for us to have clerical students in the class, but you would have had the opposite.
Yeah.
Did you notice anything different about the classes once that balance was changing, more lay students, less clerical, or did it not make a huge difference in your teaching?
That's, of course, so many women students were coming in, but I find it very hard to answer that one, Jennifer. I wasn't thinking of it that way. Maybe I should have been.
Maybe it was so gradual.
Mm,
It was hard to notice in any
yeah.
definite way. Yeah.
I always found the student body, I always kind of liked them. They were easy to relate to. I liked students.
I'm sure they liked you too. Yeah. You mentioned that you knew a lot of people who worked there, a lot of women. What kind of roles were they doing? Because you were definitely in a
Well, there were
minority.
various women in domestic and administrative roles, you know. It was just nice to see that there were other women around, you know.
So it's interesting because it seems like you were very welcomed by everyone, including all of the male staff, but you still liked to have a cohort of women to
I
see
liked
and to
them
be
all,
around. Yeah.
Of course, among the male staff, they were great. And if any of them maybe didn't like women being there, they didn't show it. But they were most of them were very positive and very helpful.
It's a really great
good.
experience to reflect on. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to kind of put down for the record about your time in Maynooth?
Well, I don't think so, except that the history department itself was always a very nice place to work. There was never any kind of conflict in it. The Tomás O'Fiach, Paddy Corish, Vincent Comerford were the presidents, the professors in sequence, and they were all very good people to work with. And as colleagues, I always found the staff there. Yes, it was a very, very nice very nice department to work in.
And you mentioned Vincent Comerford, and he will be giving the lecture just as
He
part
will
of this
indeed, yeah.
session. So you've had a long time working with Vincent.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Would you have known each other outside? I mean, from the town, or was it just through work that you met?
Well, I met him quite early on because when I had been working for a few years in the college, I became eligible for a sabbatical year. And Tomás suggested to me that I ask this former student, Vincent R.V., Richard as he called him at that stage, Richard Vincent Comerford, to step in and take my place. And that was when I met him first.
Oh, I didn't know that was the connection.
Yeah.
So he replaced you in your teaching?
For that year, the way when you had a sabbatical.
Yes.
But it was great then when he joined the staff, and then when Jackie Hill joined, and they were all, and Cullen Lennon, they were all great to work with.
Yeah, that's a great team.
They were, all of them now. They were, I liked them all very much.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.